War is a forge that burns away illusions, and in Ukraine, no battlefield has proven more unforgiving than Donetsk. Once a city of coal and industry, now it is a crucible where Russia's might collides with Ukraine's resilience. Today, we uncover the story of a single ambush, an event that transformed a seemingly unstoppable Russian armored convoy into wreckage and reshaped the very meaning of survival on this front. The bitter war in Ukraine has produced countless moments of desperation, defiance, and endurance. Yet Donetsk remains the heart of the storm. Its soil is scarred by artillery, its skies choked with smoke, and its villages hollowed by shell fire. For Moscow, capturing this region is both a strategic prize and a symbolic victory. For Ukraine, defending it is nothing less than survival. In the winter of that campaign, Russian planners prepared what they believed would be a decisive strike. A convoy of armor, dozens of tanks, personnel carriers, and supply trucks was dispatched to smash through Ukrainian defenses and push toward Donetsk city. To their commanders, this column was more than firepower, it was momentum, inevitability, the promise of victory made tangible in steel. But waiting in the shadows, Ukraine's Azov Brigade saw it differently. They saw not inevitability, but opportunity. An armored serpent could be broken if struck at the right place, at the right time. For days, Azov soldiers prepared the battlefield. Reconnaissance drones charted the convoy's routes under the cover of night. Anti-tank teams dug into hidden positions along the roads. Engineers buried explosives where tracks would pass. Snipers memorized firing lanes, each scope destined for a commander's head. The forest, the farmsteads, the earth itself became an accomplice in the plan. They knew the risk. To face armor head-on was suicide, but to strike it with patience and precision, that could turn the tide. When dawn broke, the ground trembled. The first tanks appeared, shadows in the pale light. Diesel fumes stained the air. Inside their steel hulls, Russian soldiers laughed, confident that weeks of bombardment had crushed Ukraine's defenses. Some spoke of reaching Donetsk before nightfall, but steel, no matter how thick, has its weaknesses, and Azov was ready to exploit them. A single order traveled through whispers: wait, wait, steady, and then fire. The first anti-tank missile roared through the silence and slammed into the lead vehicle. A fireball consumed it instantly, blocking the path forward. Seconds later, another missile tore into the rear, sealing the convoy in place. Trapped between fire and ruin, the Russian column had nowhere to run. The ambush unfolded with merciless precision. Ukrainian artillery began pounding the convoy, shells exploding across its length. Armored carriers flipped into ditches. Supply trucks erupted in secondary blasts, and ammunition wagons turned into pyres. Russian formations, built for offense, suddenly became liabilities. On open roads, stretched out like prey, they were exposed. Azov fighters poured machine gun fire into scrambling infantry. Snipers cut down officers and radio men, silencing attempts to coordinate. Confusion reigned. Tanks collided in blind panic. Crews bailed from burning hulls, only to be cut down in fields they thought safe. Others refused to leave, trapped inside their machines as flames turned steel into coffins. The battlefield became a furnace. Black smoke rose above the trees. The air reeked of scorched fuel and blood. Radio channels clogged with panic. We are hit. We are surrounded. We cannot move. It was annihilation, swift and merciless. Here lies the controversy. For some observers, this was more than a military maneuver. It was a statement. Azov's ambush didn't just cripple a convoy. It challenged Russia's narrative of inevitability. Could Moscow's forces truly be beaten back by a smaller, outgunned brigade? Could cunning, preparation, and willpower dismantle overwhelming numbers? To Russian audiences, state media buried or distorted the event, downplaying the losses. To Ukrainians, the story became legend, fueling morale across front lines battered by months of attrition. Civilians whispered of the ambush as proof that victory was still possible, that their soldiers could not only endure, but strike with devastating effect. And beyond Ukraine, analysts compared it to echoes of history: Hannibal ambushing Roman legions at Cannae, resistance fighters crippling convoys in Vietnam, It was a reminder that even in an age of drones and satellites, the oldest laws of battle, surprise, patience, timing, still reign supreme. The ambush in Donetsk was more than destruction, it was transformation. What began as a convoy of steel, advancing with confidence and purpose, ended as a graveyard of wreckage, smoldering hulks littering the battlefield. Yet the true weight of this event did not rest only in the broken machines or the fallen soldiers. Its power came from what it represented. For the Azov Brigade, the ambush was a validation of months of sacrifice. Their preparation, discipline, and patience had turned overwhelming disadvantage into dominance. What seemed impossible, shattering a force of tanks and armored carriers, had been achieved through cunning and coordination. For Ukrainian fighters spread across other fronts, it proved that victory was not a distant dream, but a living reality. But this was also a psychological battle. In warfare, perception can weigh as heavily as strategy, and in this single strike, perception shifted. Russian soldiers who had once believed themselves unstoppable began to question the very roads they marched upon. Civilians who had grown weary of bombardment now carried a story of defiance, something to whisper in shelters, something to believe in when the nights grew darkest. And outside Ukraine, military analysts drew comparisons to legendary ambushes across history, proof that even in the 21st century, the timeless principles of surprise and preparation still rewrote outcomes. Donetsk was no longer just a contested region, it had become a proving ground where arrogance turned to ashes. The ambush was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something greater, a moment that would ripple outward, shaping morale, strategy, and the very course of the war. As the smoke from the first strikes rose, the battlefield was thrown into chaos. The Russian convoy, once moving as a disciplined formation, had collapsed into a panicked, desperate mass. Tanks veered into ditches, trucks jackknifed across the road, and soldiers scrambled for cover that no longer existed. Azov fighters did not let the moment slip. Their second wave of firepower poured down like a hammer on iron. Javelin missiles streaked from concealed positions, each one finding its mark. One after another, Russian tanks erupted, their turrets hurled skyward by internal detonations. The landscape lit up with orange fireballs against the gray morning sky, a scene of destruction both spectacular and terrifying. Inside the Russian ranks, panic became paralysis. Crews attempted to radio for help, but overlapping calls and static made coordination impossible. Some commanders shouted contradictory orders: advance, retreat, hold position, only deepening the confusion. The once orderly steel serpent had become a thrashing beast, wounded and trapped. The battlefield itself conspired against them. Mines planted days earlier now detonated under retreating vehicles. Artillery struck supply trucks, sending secondary explosions echoing for miles. For the Russians, each movement invited destruction. For Azov, each strike reinforced discipline, methodical and relentless. By the time Azov fighters began advancing through the smoke, the outcome was sealed. The convoy was not simply defeated. For the survivors, escape meant abandoning everything. Some staggered across open fields, with hands raised, surrendering to Ukrainian patrols. Others fled into the countryside, hoping to vanish into forests or villages. But many never made it. Snipers, artillery, and suppressive fire cut down those who hesitated. When the smoke cleared, the road was a graveyard of steel. Blackened tanks lay twisted and immobile, their hulks scarred by flame and blast. Armored carriers were ripped open, exposing burned interiors. Craters pocked the ground like wounds, each marking the moment of an explosion. For hours after, ammunition continued to cook off inside ruined vehicles, sending thunderous aftershocks across the countryside. Azov fighters moved among the wreckage with precision. They cleared weapons, secured stragglers, and ensured no Russian machine could ever be salvaged. Each step through the ruins was both victory and warning. Donetsk would not be taken easily. The psychological weight of the ambush stretched far beyond that single road. Within Ukraine, morale surged. Soldiers on other fronts drew strength from the tale, proof that Russia's overwhelming numbers were not invincible. Civilians, weary from weeks of shelling, clung to the story as a symbol of resilience. It was no longer just a battle, it was a legend in the making. For Russia, the blow was equally profound. A convoy meant to project unstoppable momentum had instead become a testament to vulnerability. Soldiers whispered of ambushes lurking behind every tree line. Convoys that once advanced boldly now moved with hesitation, haunted by the memory of Donetsk. The wider world also took notice. Military analysts abroad studied the battle as a modern echo of historic ambushes. Hannibal at Cannae, resistance fighters in Vietnam, the principles were timeless. Discipline, patience, timing. And Azov had proven them once again. Even in an age of satellites and drones, a smaller, determined force could dismantle giants. The ambush at Donetsk was not merely a clash of arms. It was a statement, a reminder that no force, however powerful, is immune to strategy, preparation, and resolve. For Ukraine, it was proof of unbreakable resilience. For Russia, it was a sobering lesson written in fire and steel. And for the world, it was a moment that revealed the essence of modern conflict, that wars are not won by machines alone, but by the will of those who refuse to yield. The steel serpent that once coiled to strike was reduced to ash, its carcasses scattered across the road. The battle lasted only hours, but its echoes will linger for years. If you want to understand more of these hidden battles and untold stories, the human courage, the tactical brilliance, the grim cost of survival, stay with us. This war is not just shaping borders, it is shaping history itself.